Okay, you're all set.
Okay, so welcome back to week 10. We're almost through. This is actually the last week where we really get into the nitty-gritties of Articulate Storyline. Next week, we're going to talk about the experience of deploying and the curation of content once it's up in your LMS and you're actually deploying it to students. Let's see. Sorry, I'm trying to mute my phone and it's not going well. Let's try that again. So this week we're going to talk about variables and advanced skills, and this is diving into how to build a quiz from scratch. I think I alluded to earlier in the process that I ended up ultimately deciding to build all of my quizzes from scratch as opposed to using the wizard, just to have more opportunities to just really control how content was presented to students. So we're going to talk through some of those things, but I will also note that in the book, and let's see, I guess I should do the slides in order. So we're going to talk about using basic variables, because that's one of the things that you can use to control navigation, but also how to get people through quizzes. You're going to learn how to build a custom quiz, and then how do you connect triggers and variables and quizzes and put it all together so that you have one streamlined experience to ultimately deliver a pretty homogeneous experience to students, since we are mostly talking about delivering mandatory content. So again, here's the link. I think it's possible that this bit.ly here might take you straight to the password protected site. So if you need to get, maybe Lisa can pop the link into where it is that you sign up to get the password. I think it's actually, if you just go as far as the sexual violence prevention work group, I think if you take out the rest of the online trainings and the downloads, you'll get to where you need to go. So again, we're working off of week 10, which is chapter 10. So let's talk a little bit about variables. Variables you can think of as a folder to put a piece of information in. So when you create a variable, you're creating a content area for somebody else to put a piece of information. But like, we could create a variable called name, and then everybody who takes the class would type their own name in, and then it stays in the storage on that computer, basically in the cookies cloud area. I don't know, don't understand all exactly how it works out, but it holds it in kind of that random short-term memory area of that user's computer. And then when Articulate, maybe you want to create a certificate at the end, and then you can pull back out, you can put a wild card and say which basically says, we're going to make a certificate that whatever that person has in the folder that says name, we're going to put that here in the center of the certificate. So that's one place where we see variables used a lot. So there's a couple of different kinds of variables, and variable, I guess this is one of those places where there are places in Articulate Storyline where it gets into a little bit of coding. So it's really a very coding light kind of a thing. So if you have any experience with that, you're going to see all these things are the same. And if not, like this, it's a lot of logic. So take a deep breath and you can work your way through it. But again, in the books, I really put very specific, straightforward, do this, do this, do this, do this, do this. And so it'll talk you all the way through. So there's three kinds of variables that Articulate Storyline lets you have. And when you create a variable, you designate which one it's going to be. So it could be a text, but text could also have numbers, like a password. Like when you're creating a password, that's a text variable kind of space. Everything is stored as is. There are number variables, and in which case that is going to read it as a number. So if you put in 10, it really means the value 10, as opposed to just like my address is the house number 10, which is kind of a different placeholder, kind of a number. And then there's also true, false. And so yes, no, binary. And those are places like Articulate Storyline builds in a variable automatically to display captioning automatically in videos or not. I'm going to show you where to find that. So you could turn that on so it's automatically yes, so that it defaults to playing captions and the students then have to turn it off. Or you can, what I've done in my courses is I have it set to off, but I offer a checkbox really early on in the module, and I'll take you behind the scenes and you can see how I've set that checkbox up to turn the player display captions on. So the students have control of it, but it's presented to them at a point when they can do that. So we're going to talk about where do you find variables today. one of my tips and tricks is that if you start to use a lot of variables, that because they're listed alphabetically, I tend to name them after, I tend to think of my scenes as modules, and I name all of my variables based on the module that they appear in. So that way when it shows up in order, all of the variables for module 1 are all in a row together, and that just makes it really easy to find stuff, because it can get unwieldy when you have a lot of stuff in there. So variable logic, and again, this is really like, I can still think of the math teacher. It was Mrs. Truscott that taught me logic. Remember those proofs, the P and the points to the Q? And I think I did have a love of that particular part of math, but I like it. It's, you know, you just kind of have to turn off opinion and thought and just be like, okay, if it's doing this, it's going to do that. So if I hit the light switch, it's going to turn it on. I have a lot of rooms where there's 2 light switches. So sometimes turning it off actually turns it on. So it's kind of thinking through that kind of logic. It's either on or off, and the switch is moving it from one state to the next. So you can use a trigger to change a variable, and then you can then use that variable's answer to change the state. So if I want a module 2 button to read complete, what am I going to do? Well, I'm going to put, first of all, I'm going to have to create states for that piece of graphic. When I get to the end of the module, I'm going to have something that's behind the scene is changing. I'm going to have to create a variable to say that, is this module done or not? And where am I going to hide that piece of information? So we'll talk about that. So we got to create a yes, no variable. Is the module complete? And then we're going to have to put in a trigger that tells when to turn that trigger from no to yes. And then we're going to have to create a space where we can visualize that piece of information. So it kind of loops through a couple of different slides, but all the variables are they hide out in the same place. I talked about player display captions, and I talked already about these things. So we're going to see what those look like today. So I think at this point, I think I'm going to turn off PowerPoint and let's go talk about variables, and let's change out. And let's see, I see some chats already. Okay. All right. People are doing all of the things. All right. So we are going to articulate. So let's go to, let's see here. So this, I'm actually working in party science right now and getting it ready to launch to my campus this week. So this is where I've been doing a lot of space. So at the start of my modules, I have this little radio button here that says, click this button to turn on accessibility features. I do have a little question mark here. If they click that question mark, it's going to reveal this extra layer that talks about what are the accessibility features in this module. And I'm realizing that I didn't get this layout right for this one, so I'm going to fix that right now. And this module is all about red, so I've been changing that. And I've also, we talked about this before, changing out pictures. So if I change that out, I'm going to get the correct close button. So this is good that we picked this one because I was able to fix some stuff. So this radio button right here, I'm going to click it just so it's easy to find it right down here. So here's the radio button. And when I click on that radio button, I can see what have I added here in terms of triggers. So it says set ADA module to equal to true. And I think this is actually redundant here because I was worried about which one was going to work. And then that was when I learned about the player display captions is equal to true. So how do we get to variables? And that's right up here. It hides out in the triggers box. And if I click this, and Lisa, maybe you can confirm that the pop-up window showed up for you. It says variables.
Yep, I can see it.
Okay, perfect. So these are where all the variables for the entire project live. So here's this player display captions. And if I click on this and come down here to edit, I can see this is the name. This is the type. Once you create a variable, you can't change the type, which is why that is grayed out. And I can see that the default value is false. So we don't want the player to display captions as it is. So by creating this trigger down here that when the radio button is selected, it's going to change this to true, then it will be able to play for students. So it's like the on-off switch. A true false is really an on-off switch for students to use. I think I think some of these ones are kind of vestigial kinds of triggers that were from this player to display captions was something that Storyline added after I started building stuff. So this one still exists. So setting ADA module to equal to true when the user clicks. So that's a variable that I created up here. And again, it starts out as false. And I don't remember the exact part on why that is, but I think it's one of those things I just haven't cleaned out that trigger. So I was attacking that problem from 2 different directions. So that's a pretty simple trigger, but we also could talk about making something be done. And so I have this M1 complete here to talk about when module 1 is complete, I want to change the button so that it looks complete. So let's create an M2 complete, and let's talk about how we would use that. So I'm going to add a new trigger. I'm going to call this module 2 complete. It's going to be a true false variable. And the default value is false because when somebody first starts the program, will they have completed module 2? No, it's not true. So therefore it's false. So we're going to call that okay. So now I'm going to say, okay, that folder exists. I'm going to go to the very last slide of this module. Now, the navigation is set up for module 2 that they can only get to the last slide by going all the way through. So here's my second to last slide. Here's my next button. So when the user clicks this next button, I know that their only option is to get to my very last slide. And this is just something I put in as a last slide of each scene, just to ensure that the student is getting a message that, yes, you are done. Because sometimes a student will think they're done and they're not actually done. So this is one of those, I didn't do these slides the first year I launched. And this is one of those places where it saved me a few dozen emails and was totally worth it. Because you can ask a student to send you a screenshot of that slide if something's not going right. Usually, and here's a little nugget, I have them write their name on a Post-it or put their student, some corner of their student ID on top of the screenshot so that I know, and then have them take a photo with their camera. So I know it only could possibly be their completion slide that I'm seeing when I get, that took me till year 3 to figure out, but there it is. So this is the last next button that's available to students. So what we can do now is, this is already submitting an interaction because it's attached to a quiz, but we can add more triggers to a single button. So we're going to add another trigger to this button. So by adding new, so what is the action? Well, I want to change variable. So we're going to adjust a variable, complete variable, and we're going to make it equal to true. When the user clicks, before we're clicking add a new trigger, we want to adjust a variable. They don't have change a variable. That's not a choice. So adjust a variable. Which variable are we? I can create a new variable really easily, but we already created that variable. So let's see, M2 complete. We can make it equal or not equal, but we want to make it equal to the value of true. So there's a choice. So variables, you can, some of the things you can do, like if it's a number variable, like you could, like a place where you might use that would be, maybe you have a correct try again thing, and after like the 15th time of incorrect, you just offer the student a pass through. So you could create a variable that says, quiz attempts, and every time the student gets to the quiz attempt, the try again screen, we could set it up to add a point so that when that reaches 15 points, we could be like, you know what, you tried really hard, something's not right, like here's the answer, move ahead. So you could get into that kind of level. Most students that I've found can answer these quizzes within at least the second attempt. So I've given up using those kinds of things. So adjust a variable, which variable, the M2 variable, we want it to equal a value of true when. And so when are we going to, what is the actual action that's going to change this variable? And it's going to be when a user clicks on the forward button. And when I click here, you can see all of the different things that are on the page to choose from. And I'm going to say, okay. Now, if there's also these show conditions, and this gets into some really detail. So we're going to talk about that when we talk about radio buttons in just a minute. But so now we have this is equal to true. So that's great. What are we going to do with that? Well, let's come up here. So when are they going to need to see that? Well, they're going to need to see that when they get to module 3 or if they're coming back here. So I've already got this set up to default that module 2 is checked off. But what I would be able to do here is I can add just a trigger to the slide. So nothing is highlighted here. If I add a trigger, it just ends up being existing as part of the slide. So I can do change the state of, which state? I'm going to change the state of, let's see. This is my grouping of the body buttons. I want to change it to visited when, let's see here, when the state animation, where are you? When a variable changes. Which variable? We're talking about module 2 because it's all connected to module 2. When the variable changes and the variable of module 2 is equal to true. So what did we just do here? We said that we want this button to appear as the visited state when that module 2 variable, and then we got into this very specific condition setting. When module 2 is equal to true, this button can now appear as a state of visited. So it's a lot of stepwise things. It lives in a couple of different places. So it's kind of the wormhole through. So the variable creates the folder where we can save the piece of information. We go to the place where we're going to actually store the information, which is the end of that module. And then we can use that information to then drive the change of something else to give a visual cue later. So that is variables. I think those are the biggest places where I play with variables. You can also, places where I've used variables is if I've given students a choice of different paths through content, I can set up each path to change a variable, and then I can make it so a next button isn't available for clicking until all of those, complete sections list as true that they've been seen. So I want to talk about customizing quizzes. So I actually started to build a space where we could look at another quiz up here. So we have, thank you, Windows just automatically changed the size of things. So I have this quiz over here, which is a standard drink size question. So I'm just going to grab all of the artwork on this page, just so we can kind of build this from scratch on a new slide. So, and I'm going to just get rid of all, let's see, I'm going to ungroup these things, and I'm going to get rid of all of the radio buttons so that we can start right from scratch with adding radio buttons, but we have all this nice artwork here ready to roll. So, this part of setting up a quiz is pretty straightforward. Let's get rid of all of those. So we have, title, we have a question, we have some artwork, we have some buttons that will drive going someplace. So how do we make this interactive? So we are going to insert, and we're going to insert an input marker. Now this is a question that only has one correct answer. So we're going to use radio buttons to designate that. So I'm going to put a radio button here. And I'm going to just Control C and Control V through this and grab a couple of different radio buttons. And I think we talked about align and distribute. I'm holding down my Shift key here, and I'm highlighting all of those and coming up here to align. We're align the middle. So at least they're all in a row, and then I can kind of grab those things and I can do an align. Center, that should get it a little bit better. Or let's see, I'm just gonna. So these are all buttons, and if you notice, it's just when I click one, it doesn't, what we want to be able to say is we want these buttons to work together as a set, and that's exactly what they are and Articulate as a button set. So when I click this one, I want the computer to think of all of these as one group, and only one of these is going to be correct. So actually the first thing we need to do is name these. So this is my beer button. Let's see, this one is my wine button. My shot button. And there's my cup button. What I'm going to do is I'm going to select all of these. I'm going to right click, and over here I have this little button set thing here, and I'm going to call this a new set, and we're going to call this let's see, this is a drink size. And so now all of these are going to work in tandem, and then it sets it up so that if one goes on, the other ones go off. Now, it appeared as though I was doing that before, but if we had gone into preview mode, you would have noticed that it was gonna change, it was not gonna work right. So now we've got these buttons that work together as a group. And so what we need to be able to do now is send a student one place or another. So if they click a submit button, we want to tell them whether they got the answer right or the answer wrong. So what we're gonna actually do is insert a slide layer. We're gonna insert 2 of those, and we'll have a correct message. And we'll have an incorrect message. So I get these slide layer properties, and these are really the ones that you want to deal with, is do you want to hide the other slide layers, or do you want to hide the objects on the base layer? So, you know, when somebody's on this, do we want to see the things underneath it? Sometimes I use that and I just keep an image on the left and I just change out the text box on the right. So I don't want to hide the objects on the base layer, but in this case, we don't want them to see anything other than this layer right here. So we're on incorrect. So let's insert a text box. What's going on here? All right, that was unintended consequence. All right. Okay, we'll just see you got it incorrect. Try again. Just to make things a little bit easier, let's make that white for right now. I'm gonna just, since it took so long to get the text box the last time. So we could also think at this point, when the person gets it correct, this is where we can put the next button to send them to the next one. But if they do the incorrect, we probably want to give them another chance to try again. So let's see, we'll insert a picture because I have a close button close at hand. It's a really large close button. So we're doing lots of review today too. So we're going to click this. We want to just close this layer when the user clicks on my picture. Oh, and this is interesting. When I created that text box, it started at 2 seconds. So we'll fix that. So they're gonna get it incorrect. They close the button. They're gonna come back to drink size. With correct, we can offer them the chance to move on. So let's make that longer. We're gonna insert a next button. We can, so I'm gonna put jump to slide. I'm not quite sure what the next slide is, so we'll go with that for now. When the user clicks, picture 1. So it's gonna go someplace after they go there. So now, how do we get it so that when they click the right answer, they go to the correct slide? And how do we get it if they choose the incorrect thing? How do we get them to get to the incorrect message? So the correct one's the easiest one to start. So remember, I named all of these things. So when we come to the submit button, this is where we're going to hide all of that directional information. So we're going to add a trigger. We're going to show a layer. Which layer? We're going to show the correct layer when the user clicks And I guess it is called the forward button here. And what's the condition? The condition is if, let's see, I guess this is considered a variable. Is this a variable? I forget. See, all these things, shapes. So here's the shape. We want to find the cup button, and the cup button is equal to selected. So let's talk about that again. So we want to show the layer of correct if the user clicks the forward button and the cup button radio button state is selected. So there's a couple of different states. We talked about states over here before. Let me add that again so we can get in there. So there's shapes. Let me just pick another one for right now. So we can choose equal to or not equal to. So when you choose shapes, it's going to pick all of the things on your slide. It's all the objects. So normal, hover, down, disabled, visited, those are all things that describe kind of like how I use the navigation tools where it's a visual cue. Have you visited this thing? Is your mouse hovering over this thing? So in this case, it's a selected or not selected kind of a choice. So because it's a radio button, if it's a checkbox, selected would also be what you want to do. So we don't want the shot button. So I'm going to cancel that one. So what this is going to happen now is that if the user clicks the submit button and they've got the correct answer picked, they're going to see the correct slide layer. And then from there, they'll get the next button to go on to the next slide and they move smoothly on through. So how do we also set up a variable then so that if they click any of these other things that it sends them to the incorrect one? So we're going to create a new trigger. We're going to show a layer. This time we're going to show them the incorrect layer. When the user clicks the submit button or the forward button in this case, on the conditions of, and this time we're going to add 3 conditions because is the beer button clicked or the wine button clicked or the liquor, I think we called it the shot button here, click. So let's add a condition. So shape, we can do beer button. If it's equal to selected, we know it's wrong, so they need to go to the incorrect one. So now when we add another condition, now we have this choice of and or. So because it's a radio button or there's multiple ways to get this answer wrong, we're going to put these ors. So if the beer button is selected, if the wine button is selected, or the shot button is selected. So we have 3 different conditions that could potentially send us to the incorrect. So I'm not going to take the time right now to run this through the preview, but all the logic is in there. And generally these kinds of quizzes, you want, set them up, get in there, preview them, make sure they work the way you want them. Sometimes the order of these will make a difference. So if something doesn't work, the first thing you want to do is notice how I can highlight these separately. I can reorder those. That's usually a good first place to troubleshoot. And, the simplest solution is always going to be the best. So what's going to get us from point A to point B? And in this case, we're letting a user entered piece of information drive where they go next. Now, the other way that we could potentially do a quiz question is, let's see if I can get back here. We also have a quiz question that is all check boxes. So check boxes are choose all that will apply. Let's see if I can just get everything on this slide. And let's see, just create a new slide and drop all that content there. So let's get rid of all of those pieces of information. Now in this case, the actual answer is all of these things. We want all of the students to click all of these things. So back here on this original slide, what I do is on the try again message is like, that's correct. What you've chosen is correct, but there's a few more signs of alcohol poisoning on the list. So it'll send them back to that main question. And so the reinforcement behavior here is that just keep clicking until you get them all there. And then the correct message is like, yeah, right, every single one of these is actually a sign of alcohol poisoning. But let's pretend that that's not the case, let's pretend that, let's just change one of these to, they grow a unicorn horn. And let's see here. So we need to find this checkbox in my thing so I know which one is not right. So all of these are independent pieces of information. So they are not linked in any way. There's no button set with a checkbox. Let's see, you know what happened right there is my text box is really huge. So I was hiding that. So again, let's create real quick a couple of slide layers. We have a correct, we have an incorrect. And we're gonna just, well, let's see here. Let me come back. Another thing that you can do, I should show you all this trick, is if you have slide layers that you're gonna use in multiple places. Let's see, where did I lost my scroll bar? So let's see here, if I can control that. I control C, copied that layer, and I should be able to just copy that layer. So I'm going to get rid of this one. And we'll do the same thing over here. We'll grab. That's a nice little bonus thing about layers is you can copy and paste them. So now we have messages that are all ready to go. So in this case, if that one's selected, we know that they can't get to the correct version. So that's where we're going to start our logic here. So let's create a trigger. We want to show layer incorrect when the user clicks the forward button under the condition that the shape unicorn is equal to selected. So no matter what, because that's the one that's wrong. If it's selected, they're going to go to the wrong place. And how do we get them to the correct? Well, we're going to add another trigger. And so there's a couple of questions in SPARC where I think there's like 2 out of 4 are the correct ones. And so this one's a little bit more tricky because we have these 6 different variables here in this one. But, you know, if I want to be able to give you enough of the understanding here so that when you look at that and you can go in here and you can always click on a variable and click edit and you can see all of the little pieces in there to know how to put it back together. Or if you start to build from scratch, you can always kind of go back and you can see what's there and you can take some notes, or you can come back here and run through the logic again. So in this case, we want a lot of things to happen. We need this one to be equal to selected. We need, let's see, oh, I clicked variables. Let's click shape. We need this one to equal selected. We need this one. So I'm just repeating all of these for all of these ones that they have to choose to be correct. So all of those different checkboxes are equal to selected. And we also need this one to be unselected. So here's where we're going to do kind of a backwards thing. So we want unicorn to not equal selected. And that's going to set all of those. So it's very specific. It says what every single box has to be to get that person to get to the correct one. And that's basically what you're going to work through as you do those things. So sometimes it's easier. I always start with the smallest side of things first. I think that helps. I tend to do a lot of sketching out on paper to work my way through those things. And then it's trial and error. And like right now where I'm at, I've updated all the artwork in my alcohol course. And what I'll be doing tonight is I'm going to publish I'm going to preview each module, and I'll kind of set it up, because some of them, one of my modules has a lot of video. So I'll set it up, and as I'm kind of wandering past the room, I'll keep clicking the next to get through it without spending actually 30 minutes in front of my computer waiting for those things to go through. But it does take a while, because you do have to test every possibility. You know, you have to test the incorrect answers and make sure you review those slides, or if there's a you know, read text layer, like, you know, all of the possible things that a student can click, you really need to go through when you're going through those test phases. And so we have specified very clearly to the program what needs to happen in all of these different circumstances. There is one quiz in SPARC where it is all of the offices on campus and whether they're a confidential resource or whether they're a privacy resource. And I had contemplated pulling that one in as well too. But I think there's some good explanation in the book. And really all that one is that it's kind of multiple quizzes all on one slide. And so there's like counseling center, and then there's 2 radio buttons for counseling center. So there's one in a column for, is it a confidential resource or is it a privacy resource? So the 2 buttons for the counseling center are a button set together, and they become the counseling center button set. And so this is one of those places where putting really detailed notes in the timeline. So you're really naming all of those individual pieces, because you could see when I got into that, telling the computer when to show correct and when to show incorrect, it's really handy to have it very specific, so you know that you're choosing the right things at that point. So in that case, I think like I have athletics in there, so that there's a button set of confidential and private for that. Health center, there's a button set for that. So every single one of those rows has a button set. So you could do like a whole series of true false things. So you could have a column of true buttons and a column of false buttons. And then question 1 is going to have a button set of true false. Question 2 is going to have a button set of true false. And you'll have all of that information. So I think we talked about all of the things I wanted to talk about today. So using a trigger to turn on letting the student choose to turn on closed captioning or not, or like you said, you can just, if you want to go into this variable setting here for player display captions and edit it so that it automatically plays for students, you can do that. And when I publish it with that set as true, it's gonna follow through this is all kind of stuff that's in the background under the surface that you can't really see, that's driving all of the information as it comes out through the publishing. So that really is where the power of this program lies, is that you have all these nice little wizards to get through content and drive some interactive stuff without having to know a lot of the coding. And that's really what takes so long when it's publishing, because it's pulling all this information and it's doing the coding. So it deploys and displays exactly as you want it to display. So those were all of the things on my list. So I'm going to go ahead and close out of this. I'll keep Articulate open for a moment, and let me open up the chat window so I can see if there's anything going on. But if you want to unmute and ask a question, or let's see, I can review and see what's in there from before. Let's see. So I think, let's see, weeks 5 through 8 of the PowerPoint slides and the recordings. I think Lisa maybe got on there. I was a little delayed in getting a bunch of stuff out. So I know that all of the links are up on the SPARC Tech Academy and YouTube. I think the PowerPoint slides are, if they're not up, I'm guessing that they aren't up now that I'm getting this information. So
I didn't send them to Jeff yet, Rebecca. I was gonna wait. I'll get today's and capture it. Just
sounds good.
I don't want to inundate. He's crazy busy. So the more I can give him at once, the better. So I'll try to get it up as soon as possible.
Yeah. If somebody's working through something, send me an email and I can get it to you so you get unstuck. We don't want anybody to get stuck right now, but yeah. So are there any questions? I know this stuff is pretty deep, and if you haven't really even gotten into Articulate yet, I think it's cool to know that these things exist. I do think that you know, once you get in there and building this stuff, this is where you really start to see all of the possibilities of things that you can do with Articulate Storyline. And I think one of the things I did do when I first got the program is to go into the Articulate community, and there's places where people share stuff that they're working on, and some of it's like so amazing, and it starts to dawn on you that you likely have in your life had exposure to content that was created in Storyline without realizing it. Like you can create touchscreen kiosk kind of information. So if you have a touchscreen in your area and you want students to get to information, like you can build interactive content in this place. So there's a lot here. So I think these are the nice thing about like SPARC and TRAC is that it gets you to a first place. Like you have a really concrete goal and it forces you to learn the skills that you need to get to that concrete goal. But then in doing so, you have the confidence and the fluidity with the program to start to think like, oh, if I can do this, could I also do this other thing? I have a little thing I did with my dietetics students because we were looking for a protein calculator that they could use at a tabletop experience. And what we were finding is that all the protein calculators we could find on the web were basically connected to third-party vendors that wanted to sell protein powders. And so I was like, well, you all must, you know, I sent them away with like, go figure out what the calculator is. And we ended up making a very simple one-slide Articulate thing that, you know, we have the first thing is, you know, put your weight in kilogram or put your weight in pounds in this box. And then we had push this button. And then I had on the back end, well, so we're going to save weight as a variable. And then we're going to multiply that weight times whatever, 2.2, whatever the kilograms is so that, you know, so there was a trigger attached to the first, like, okay, I added my weight button and then we did the math on the back end. And now the number in that box is kilograms. And then forget what the next, you know, I think there's one like, you know, what's your kind of activity? Are you more sedentary? Do you do more strength training? Do you do more cardio? What's your fitness level? And then based on which of those buttons they chose, we were able to, again, take that variable because weight now has changed because we've modified it to kilograms and we could do the math on the back end. So for the user, all they ever really did was enter their weight in pounds and then pushed a couple of buttons to send us a little bit more information. And then on the back end, we were able to use variables to just do the math and spit out the piece of information. And it solved that problem really well. They could have it on their phones. We sent them out with tablets and it worked, you know? And so I think there are places that can do that. One of my projects I've really wanted to do is a BAC calculator. There's tons of apps that are BAC calculators, but students tend to use those from the perspective of like, how much can I drink before I'm going to get in trouble? And I would really love to do one where it's like working with counselors and addictions counselors where students could enter in their information and then get feedback of like, well, you know, it's risky for the following reasons. Like, what are the things that happen? You know, what are the risks? You know, like it sounds like you might get more into that 0.08 to 0.1 range, which, you know, your likelihood of death is low, but you're still going to make maybe some poor choices because your prefrontal cortex is offline at this point. So, you know, that's one of my dream projects, but I know how to do it in here. And the equation is super complicated, but I feel like confident I can figure it out. I have a math teacher on call who's going to help me get that part of it correct. But yeah, I think there's some fun things that we could do with this in the world of prevention and response and all these different places on campus that we find ourselves situated in. I know another one of my dream projects is, you know, helping students navigate campus resources. And, you know, so how do you start out? Like, are you a helper of a student? Are you the parent of a student? Are you a faculty member? Like, so that we have kind of that variable to help drive where people might get responses or answers. Like if you're visiting campus, your choices for how to report, you know, solutions or responses from the campus might be different than if you are a student on campus. And so how do we help people navigate some answers to questions through this really kind of nested logic? So it's definitely possible. It's time. And I don't have a time turner, which I really wish I did. So I think at this point, Lisa, we probably can stop recording for the day. I can hang on a minute longer if anybody wants to ask a question off recording or off camera. And